Welcome to Real Estate Investing Abundance, the show for busy, fulfilled professionals like you to learn how to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alan Lomax.
Hello, Enlightened Investors. Welcome, and I'm delighted that you are joining us for the launch of our new podcast, Real Estate Investing Abundance. 3 times each week, we will bring value bombs of investment wisdom from the most successful and renowned experts in the industry. The focus is on passive investment in real estate to help you as our listeners develop financial independence to live life abundantly. If you enjoy the show, please take a moment, find us on Apple Podcasts, and leave us a review. Reviews are vital to growing our audience so we can help more people find their avenue to financial freedom. Each week for the first 4 weeks, we will do a drawing of all those who submit reviews. The winner of the drawing will receive a $25 Barnes & Noble gift certificate. So please go to Apple Podcast and leave us a review. Enlightened Investors, happy to be back with you again today. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. If this is your first time tuning in, I know you'll find great value in the show. Are you perhaps a busy professional passionate about the work of your calling, but have come to realize that the hope of developing financial independence has taken a backseat to priorities of following your passion? If you can identify with this, I've got good news. D. Talker Capital is an investment company designed for passionate, fulfilled professionals like you to help you develop financial independence built on solid passive real estate investments. We've created an online investors club just for you. So go to our website today, stevetucker.com, and enroll. And there you'll find support and help for all of your investing goals. Today's guest brings us a wealth of definitive knowledge from over 3 decades of experience as an attorney, a CPA, and an entrepreneur. Mark Pierce has done much of his work as he focused on securities. So he is going to give us lots of value in terms of investing in syndications. He'll show us how to work with syndications and also help us to understand how to protect our assets. So welcome to the show, Mark. Before we get into the matter of asset protection and passive real estate investment in syndications, share with us how an injury to your back saved your life.
I'd be delighted. I was working for an offshore drilling company in Houston, Texas, 1979, 1980, and was in their management training program. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. I was traveling extensively through Latin and South America and for the West Coast as well. I'm doing pretty well. And I hurt my back lifting some offshore materials onto a platform. And it resulted in a workman's comp claim. I couldn't work any longer. So as a result, I was drummed out of the management training program. They offered me a desk job in Houston, of course. They're very decent about it. But I just didn't see my path being along those lines. So I made an application and went to law school. About 9 months into law school, 6 to 9 months into law school, the drilling vessel that I had been on, the Glomar Coral Sea, was sunk in a typhoon in the South China Sea. And it killed everyone aboard, including several friends of mine on the crew that I was on. So if I had not injured my back and become an attorney, I would have been dead at the age of 25.
What a fortuitous happening. Oftentimes, good things can come from tragedies if we can just find those silver linings. Let's begin with the basic question. What is the first and most fundamental thing every passive investor should do to protect their own interest as well as their family assets?
I think the first thing that you can do as a passive investor, as an individual and looking forward to the accumulation of wealth, is put yourself into a trust or some sort of entity environment where each and every asset that you invest in is separated from your personal financial statement from the standpoint of whether or not you have personal liability on it. Now, if you're a passive investor in most real estate investments, you're investing in a corporation, an LLC, or a limited partnership or something along those lines. But typically, you're doing it as an individual. And if something were to happen within those projects, then many times what ends up happening is that the attorney for the plaintiff comes in and sues all the passive investors as well, alleging some sort of breach of duty that allows them to pierce through the corporate veil. If you own your limited partnership interest or your LLC interest or your corporation interest in another LLC, it's very difficult for them to pierce through those veils and to find individual liability against you. And it's not so much that ultimately that you're going to be prevailed against in a court of law. The thing is that you will be dragged into the court and litigated against. And don't worry, if you're innocent, you won't have to pay anybody's attorney's fees, but you'll probably have to pay your own. So it can run upwards $10,000, $50,000 to defend yourself on these types of suits. So my recommendation is always take those interests in an entity that provides for liability protection for you.
You brought up the aspect of trust as well as LLCs. Tell us the difference between a trust and an LLC in terms of what they are in the first place and how it is that they would function differently if the syndication ended up in a lawsuit.
An LLC is something that's been around since the late 90s. Wyoming was the first state to come up with the LLC. Since then, every other state in the United States has developed an LLC statute. There's a uniform statute as well. The limited liability company has a very thin regulatory framework that allows you as an investor or you as a manager within that LLC to structure that limited liability company as you see fit, rather than taking a corporate or limited partnership structure, which is dictated to you by the statute. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. Plus, from the standpoint of taxation, it gives you a great deal more flexibility than you have in the other entities. But it is a business entity and it holds assets. It doesn't provide for the descent of those assets after you're dead, unless you provide some fairly substantial restrictions within the operating agreement itself as to who can accede to those membership interests or who cannot, and whether or not they'll accept you in as a partner, that sort of thing. If you hold your assets in a trust, and you can hold membership interests in a trust, then the trust itself allows you a pot, if you will, that you put all your interests in. If something happens to you, who takes care of the management of that pot? It could be your spouse, or it can be a sibling, or it could be a corporate trustee with professional expertise, or it could be your kids, whatever you dictate. So the LLC is really for holding business interests and making sure that those interests are isolated and liability away from you, and that you're able to manage it. The trust allows for your estate planning in the event of your incapacity or death.
I guess you could have both. You could have your LLC in a trust.
That's exactly the fact. You should have them both that way. Your LLCs would be owned by a trust. Whatever happens within the LLC happens as a course of ongoing commercial venture. What happens within the trust is completely dependent upon what you and your family want to have happen within that trust. So the management and operation of the LLC could be completely distinct from the management and operation of your family trust, as well as should be. If those LLCs are in operating businesses, you want to attract and maintain good people to run those businesses. You can't do that if it's just the family that's involved in that business. So you can develop an operational structure within the LLC that's very distinct from the trust. The trust is run by the company. The LLC is run by professionals. And you're seeing the evolution of people these days in the United States over the last 10, 20 years, where they're developing family offices to attract and retain good personnel to run LLCs and separate businesses on behalf of the family without the family's direct involvement within that LLC. So, for example, let's say that you were a good manager and you had good abilities and you wanted to get involved in a company. One of the things you're going to ask is, okay, who do I have to report to? And if it's a dysfunctional family that you have to report to with no head of the family involved, you're going to gravitate away from that particular business enterprise. So what happens is you establish within the trust a family office with certain people who are qualified to run that family office, who devolve all the operational structure down to a professional manager and check in strategically from time to time. That way you can attract and retain the best people to run the LLC, and the family gets the benefit of that. And I'll give you a specific example of something that happened here recently. I'm a Denver Broncos fan. And the gentleman who owned the team developed dementia in the early 1970s, or I'm sorry, the beginning of this last century, the early 2000s. And his name is Pat Boland. And he was a magnificent owner and a great developer, some really good teams, won, I think, 2 or 3 Super Bowls during that period of time. Unfortunately, he developed dementia. He amended his trust. His family, I think it's 5 people, ended up in a fight. Finally, they took the fight to the courts. And of course, it ends up spilling out into the street. The NFL doesn't like that. So the NFL said, clean it up or sell it. So that's what happens when you have a family running a professional organization or an LLC, is that things have a tendency to fall into court systems. Court systems are public arenas. People get wind of it, what's going on, and your business starts to run downhill. As evidence, I think Denver won maybe 4 or 5 games last year. So that can happen to your LLC. Now, fortunately for the Bolands, they're worth a lot of money. but most families don't have that type of money. So they need to make sure that LLC continues to produce income for the benefit of the family without having an oversight by each and every member of the family or a fight between family members as to who gets to oversee it.
Sounds like an excellent structure. That's the way I have my entity structured, is under a trust, but then I own all my properties in an LLC. I totally agree with that.
You can sleep well at night. Nothing banging around in the night.
Exactly. Then another thing that's really important for me is the fact of anonymity. My personal name doesn't appear on any deeds or hardly in any public places. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Would you ever invest all your money in a single stock? Very unlikely. Yet investors are willing to risk $50,000 to $100,000 in a single property in real estate all the time. Avestor is the world's first customizable real estate investment platform. Investors can build their own custom portfolio selecting investments across multiple asset classes such as single-family homes, multifamily, student housing, self-storage, and shopping centers. You can also invest across multiple markets and different time frames. Avestor also enables other real estate entrepreneurs and syndicators to build and use Avestor's infrastructure and cloud platform to create their own customizable real estate funds. To learn more, visit us at avestorinc.com. Avestor, real estate investing made simple.
Tell us a little bit about Wyoming, why Wyoming is different than other states, and why you recommend Wyoming LLCs and trusts.
Several reasons, actually. And Wyoming is the first state to come up with the LLC model. And we've been at the forefront of LLC statutory reformation over the last 24 years. And there's a gentleman locally, Sam Western, who writes for The Economist magazine. And he has characterized Wyoming as the new onshore-offshore trust jurisdiction. So rather than having to go to the Seychelles or the Cayman Islands, you can come to the state of Wyoming and obtain the same sort of benefits without leaving the protection of a U.S. court, which is a huge benefit for a lot of people. I think the thing that really distinguishes the Wyoming LLC is the responsiveness of the legislature in each legislative session to update the laws as they're needed when they're needed. For example, there was a suit that came down several years ago, I believe it was in Florida, that a lot of people have said negates the asset protection legacy of a single member LLC, which is ridiculous because you typically have an LLC that's operational, owned by a holding company, and then owned by a trust on top of that. So you get a double buffer. So if every LLC that's owned by a holding company now no longer has asset protection legacy, what's the purpose of the statute? The state of Wyoming came out and they put it literally within days, came out with a statutory reformation that said the single member LLC has legal efficacy in Wyoming. And that's the level of responsiveness that you get. I'll give you another example. There was a Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals, that came out and said in ascertaining distributions out of a trust or out of perhaps an LLC, that a creditor, such as a taxing entity, could come in and say, look, for the benefit of these individuals, you have to make a distribution to them and rely on either the trust or the LLC code to force that distribution out to an individual. In Wyoming, there's charging order protection. Unless the LLC makes a distribution to that individual has no right to make a demand unless it's in the operating agreement. So a taxing entity could come in, attack the individual, and force a distribution out of the LLC or out of the trust. Wyoming came back and said, no, taxes, as a result of Wyoming law, are not a part of a necessary health, education, maintenance, or support of an individual. So it overcame the Court of Appeals decisions in 5 out of the 11 circuits that said that they could force a distribution. Another thing that the state allows is that when you have a charging interest attached against your membership interest, in other words, you as an individual have a liability that's been reduced to a judgment in a court suit, that creditor could come in and take whatever is distributed out to you. So if you had $100,000 between 4 partners and the organization agreement says they each have a 25% interest, then that 25% interest, when distributed, would have to go to that individual who has a charging order lodged against them in satisfaction of a judgment. The state of Wyoming came out and said, you do not have to make equal distributions to individuals. So what you might do is that you might take an individual who's got a charging order against them, allocate all $100,000 to that individual for income, but that allocation goes to the creditor because the creditor's got a charging order in place. So they get a $100,000 tax bill with no cash to pay the bill. So you have unequal distributions as another aspect of the Wyoming LLC statute that I find to be very interesting. Now, there have been a number of commentators that say for tax purposes that would not have efficacy, but for tax purposes, they rely on state law. So it'll be interesting to see if that's ever tested. That's one of the other benefits of the LLC statute here. We have something called the Wyoming State Political Action Committee, which is comprised of, for the most part, is driven by the larger banks in this community that put together legislative proposals year in and year out that are championed through by a couple of individuals that keep Wyoming on the top of LLC formations, keep Wyoming on the top of trust formations as well. And anonymity is one of the biggest things that we run into as private individuals. It's not that you're trying to hide anything, because the Department of Treasury through the IRS knows who the ultimate beneficial owners are. And we're fine disclosing that to the IRS. Or with consensual negotiations like a bank, if the bank wants to know who the UBO, the ultimate beneficial owner is, you disclose it to them because you want a loan and they want to have a personal name behind that loan. So at the end of the day, of course, those are disclosed, but you make the election to disclose those. The guy driving by the street sees a piece of property. He doesn't know that you, Alan, own that property, nor should he. That's none of your business. Your private business is your private business. So in the state of Wyoming, when they come in and they say, look, we need to know, we've managed to get through to this holding company, we've managed to get through this trust, we want to know who owns this LLC. The court's going to say, why? And they said, well, we think there may be these things. The court comes back and says, okay, this particular LLC has elected closed limited liability status. What that allows you to do in Wyoming, as far as I'm aware, is the only state that has this. It gets rid of all the corporate formalities, such as resolutions, meetings, those sorts of things. About the only thing that you can't do is you have to watch the flow of the money. You can't commingle money. You can't have one LLC paying for another LLC's cost expenses. You can't have your kids' tuition coming out of an LLC. You can't treat it like a pocketbook. But if you watch the money, manage the money correctly, that court's going to look at that individual and say, you're entitled to get information on who the ultimate beneficial owners are if you can prove by clear and convincing evidence that these things have happened. What proof do you have? And they're not going to have that proof because they're on a fishing expedition. So in Wyoming, you're not going to get the information that you need to be able to pierce the veil to go after these people. And that's what protects the anonymity. So you've not just got it on your public filings, the courts protect it as well. So I think that's one of the principal advantages to having a Wyoming LLC.
Well, that all sounds good and fine. It also sounds very complicated and complex, way above my pay grade. I'm glad there's attorneys who delve into that kind of information. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. As an industry-leading, relationship-focused, design-build construction firm, Mosaic Construction has worked in many different asset classes from multifamily to retail, medical, industrial, and commercial. Mosaic Construction works to execute interior and exterior renovations with their team of trades and project managers. Their experience with value-add improvements has resulted in increased ROI and long-term value of the assets. They work nationally in partnership with local trades to deliver thoughtful, problem-solving construction management solutions to all their clients. For a personal, no-obligation consultation, call Ira Singer, 773-491-3145, or email Ira at mosaicconstruction.net. You can also find Ira on LinkedIn. Is it possible to set up a Wyoming LLC in just an hour or two?
Yes, it is. We do it all the time. We have a same-day guarantee with respect to our formations. And typically what we do is we drop down our orders at various periods of time. So if you get your order in before a certain period of time, it'll be done that same day or first thing the next day, but within 24 hours. And if we don't get it done in 24 hours, we'll refund you the money and give you the LLC for free. And we also have you, in addition to getting the LLC formed, you'd like to get an employer identification number. So essentially the only thing that will hold you back is that the name you've chosen is already being used. And then you have to respond back and give us a new name, an additional name, and we'll run that until we get it done. But we'll also get the EIN to you within 24 hours as well.
Talk me through here in terms of syndication structure. Oftentimes there's going to be two LLCs involved in most syndications, but oftentimes there's three. One LLC is going to be the title holder of the property, and that LLC is going to be in the state where that property is. And then there will probably be an LLC for the management and then an LLC for the limited liability companies. In conjunction with looking at that particular kind of structure, what should a limited partner or the passive investor, what should they be looking at and what should they be concerned about when they are looking at offering memorandums and analyzing essentially the syndication structure?
I think it comes back to more than anything else, the character of the individuals who are putting the deal together. If they have a good history of putting deals together and treating their investors fairly, that's the first hallmark. If they don't, you shouldn't be dealing with them. No matter how good it looks on paper, it's never going to end up the way that they say that it's going to end up. Second thing is, as an individual, you want to look at what am I investing in and what does it own at the end of the day? Because you're right. You can separate the land off into one LLC, and maybe that's not part of the deal, but the structure itself would be. So if there are operational or other issues within the structure, you get the structure, but the land forecloses on the structure because the land basically has an obligation to it and it's not being paid. The other thing that you have to look, so you want to make sure that you're getting the structure and that you get a piece of the land if that's what you're looking at doing. You also want to look at what sort of collateral guarantees you have on the payment of the loans. For instance, if something were to happen to the major players within this entity, are there insurance provisions that would pay off a substantial portion of that debt, or at least give you some working capital reserves while you brought in a different management company? You need to really be focused on, okay, if I'm putting X in, how much of that goes into the ground and what's being hived off the top? Because if they're taking 10% as management structures and upfront fees, that can be fairly substantial. Some of these deals, you run into 20, 30% being taken off the top. That makes it very difficult to get you an acceptable rate of return over a long period of time because you gave up 30% to get in. That's too much to give in. Next thing is you want to look at that management contract. What are they going to be doing and how are they going to be compensated? And what percentage of the deal do they have? Because a lot of times these management companies will say, look, you have flips. Once I give you the money back with a guaranteed rate of return, then I had a 10% carried interest to begin with. When I get to this flip, I'm going to have a 20%. When I get to the third flip, I have 30, whatever. So eventually what they do is they dilute you down and they earn themselves in. So you have to look and you say, okay, I'm paying you to manage this thing in the first place. Provide your expertise, strategic advice, operational advice, all these things. Why are you getting this additional bumps and what's it worth to me? Because by the time, I was in Denver not too long ago. I drove by an old building that had been there since the 70s, and they've significantly rehabbed it. And it's just in a wonderful location. They've always been leased up, and they've done a good job of managing that building. I'm wondering what the ownership structure was in 1970 versus what it is now, and whether or not those interests are still paying out or if they've been hived off somehow or in some way or diluted down. So you look at that and you say, okay, once I get my money with an acceptable rate of return, is that enough? What is my rate of return going to be over a 40, 50-year period? And why am I putting all the money up to allow these people to dilute me down for doing what it is that they should be doing in the first place? So you want them to be more of a partner and less of an employee, if that's where you want to head with your rate of return on your investment. Because at the end of the day, with this particular project, I know that it's worth a lot more today pre-rehab than it was in 1970. So if you've diluted yourself out of the back end, why would you be doing that? And I think that's a good question to ask, because at the end of the day, I think one of the biggest fallacies that we run into as investors is we buy a piece of real estate and you have huge depreciation, which helps shelter your taxes. The problem is when you go to sell that real estate, they have to recapture all that depreciation as ordinary income. So if you have $1 million piece of property that you depreciated down to $100,000 and then you sell it for $2 million, you have $900,000 of ordinary income that you're paying against, and then you have the capital gains rate over that. That's a huge differential for you. So if that's what it comes down to, why are you allowing yourself to be diluted out on top of that? So those are some of the questions I ask. It comes down more than anything else. Who's your partner?
Good advice there. Enlightened Investors will be right back after this important message. I hope you're finding today's show informative and enlightening, and that you will please take a moment to find us on Apple Podcast and leave us a review. Each week for the first 4 weeks of the launch, we will hold a drawing of all those who submit reviews. The winner of the drawing will receive a $25 Barnes & Noble gift certificate. Reviews are very important for growing our audience. Your review will be immensely appreciated and will help others find their avenue to financial freedom. Before we go into our last segment here, tell our viewers and listeners how it is that they can get in touch with you.
Easiest way is to go to my website, Wyoming LLC Attorney or Wyoming Trust Attorney, and log on to the site and look through some of the information that we have there. There's a great deal of information on LLCs. We've tried to write it. We've tried to write it so that people can read it and understand it without the necessity of having somebody try to interpret what it is that I'm saying. And so we've worked hard on that. We go through contributions, different types of entity structures, tax issues that come up, asset protection issues that come up, who you can go to, how you can get a hold of us. We have customer service representatives you can call and sometimes get a little bit of information from them. You can book time with an attorney in half-hour increments if you want to do that. So that's the easiest way. And then we also have a call center. You can call and leave a message and someone will call you back. We try to take all the calls, but it just depends on volume at a particular point in time. So the number there is 307-674-1604.
Let's go into our last segment. And Mark, share with us a major setback you've experienced in life and how did you come through that? And what did you learn from that experience?
I had a friend of mine that had a placard on his desk, tough times don't last, tough people do. And I think that you have to be resilient and you have to realize that life is a long process. You're provided with a couple of opportunities. When they come by, you should seize them. And when they don't, then you just have to deal with them and realize in 10 years, this is not going to be the same as it is now. So keep a positive perspective, get up every day, go to work, treat the people around you with kindness and empathy, and deal with your problems as they come up. There was a German philosopher, Goethe, who says the truth shall set you free. Learn to look at your situation truthfully. And the best thing you could do is go get some good advisors, an accountant who's a friend, an attorney who's a friend, a business person who's a friend, your priest, your rabbi, whatever, someone who can sit down with you and say, look, Alan, Mark, this is what I'm seeing. And you may not be seeing this. And I had a friend of mine who said one time, he says, hope is the thing that you hold out to try to prevent the reality from hitting you. And in many times when you're in a bad situation, such as a bankruptcy or a failed business, you hold out this hope that somehow there's going to be a knight shining out. And like Eric Clapton said, he said, look, he's the guitarist. Eric Clapton, been up and down several times in his life. His mother said, always be nice to the people around you on the way up because you may need them on the way down. Eric Clapton said, I ran into a whole different cast of characters on the way down. And that's the thing that you have to remember is that when you're dealing with these situations, you need good advice, you need good help, but you're the one who's going to have to go deal with it. Take the worst possible case scenario that you've got and go deal with that and go figure out how to work yourself out of it. So it's the tenacity, it's dealing with it day to day, not getting overwhelmed, taking a long-term view on the horizon, and then you'll get through it.
For what in your life do you feel most grateful?
I had parents who cared that I was around, and they educated me, and they taught me to be resilient, but they also taught me gratitude. And I think that if you sit down every day and make a list of things that you're grateful for and express that gratitude to people rather than holding it back. For instance, I had the other day I came home and I had some guys come in and they cleaned the windows in the house. And I walked in, I thought, wow, they did a great job. So I called them up, ran them down. And initially I said, hey, you were just up here a couple of hours ago. I walked into the house. I'm just calling to go over what you've done. And you could hear on the other end, it's like, oh dear, what did we forget? I said, oh, you guys did a great job. I watched every window here. This is just magnificent. He says, oh, wow, thanks for calling. He says, go onto the website and give me a review, which I immediately did. It's that kind of expression of gratitude, I think, makes you feel better and definitely makes the people working for you feel better. And what does it take? It's just a simple expression of kindness out of this. You did a great job on this particular document. You did a great job on that. Thank you for remembering the parking rules. So those sorts of things, I think, make a big difference.
How are you putting your success as an attorney, a CPA, and an entrepreneur? How are you putting all of that success to work to create universal well-being and abundance for all beings?
There's a couple different ways that we're doing it. We're developing an operational structure that allows people to do quickly, efficiently, and cost effectively. LLCs, trusts, these sorts of things that they need. I know that our LLC, soup to nuts with an EIN's $299 within 24 hours, and you can talk to an attorney for $225. You can get into and out of business quickly, efficiently, without too much money. So that's one thing that we're doing with respect to the community around us. Second thing we're doing is we're trying to evolve within a structure that allows diversity and inclusion. These rights that we've been talking about, particularly since January 6th, which really struck me, really bothered me. January 6th bothered me. Who are we as a people? What are we talking about? We're talking about human rights, basic human rights. Treat people like human beings. Let them live their life the way that they want to live their life. Good Lord. If they're doing something that you wouldn't be doing, but that's what it takes to make them happy, why would you be judging them for that? So that's a second thing. Third thing is our outreach to our community and the way in which we fund projects that come through. I'm a big believer that if you give someone a little bit of money at the start of what they're doing, it's worth a whole lot more than a lot of money towards the conclusion of what they're doing. So we try to find, for instance, a friend of mine was down in Tampa, and she's one of these individuals. She's just amazing. She went out and she said, what do these kids need? And she went into one of the schools that they had, and one of the teachers said, shoes, not just any shoe, but like a really cool shoe, so they can wear these particular types of shoes to school. And it made them feel like, hey, somebody bought me a great pair of shoes. I've got a good pair of shoes. So she went out, we put a deal together, got 1,000 pairs of shoes into that little school. And I thought, that's a big deal for that kid. So that was an example of the way that we reached out to the community. We thought we did a lot of good for very little money. So that's some of the things that we look about, is more the grassroots type of community involvement.
Yeah. You had just mentioned that it's $2.99 to get an LLC together. That's your fee. What's the state fee? And I'm sure it's an annual fee.
Yeah, so state fee for Wyoming is basically $102.
Really?
So yeah, so it includes the $2.99 includes a $102 filing fee.
Gosh, that's half the cost of North Carolina. So interesting. Those are good works. That's really touching to be able to. Shoes are such a status item for children these days. I know that just made a real big difference for those children. And shoes are something that most of us just take for granted and don't even think about. But to a child who doesn't have the opportunity to get that status shoe, that's a big deal. It really is. Yeah, you should feel good about that. Mark, imagine that you have come to the end of your life, and as you lay on your deathbed, what will you look back on with your greatest sense of fulfillment and satisfaction?
Oh, my kids. My kids are all involved in the business. My son in particular, Andrew, has driven this business in ways that I would never thought would be possible. Been the best partner I've ever had. He works all the time. He enjoys his life. He gets up every day with gusto. We talk a lot, Saturdays, Sundays. We've gotten closer. And so my daughter, who's also involved, but not so much so because she's in college now, but she's also involved, and she's, really into what goes on with this. And we are enjoying that thing together, that development together, as we develop a company that, gives us sustenance, gives us a reason to be in the community, gives us some light. At the end of the day, we're helping people. So in addition to making a little bit of money, we're helping people. And I think that is at the end of the day, the involvement with my family, involvement with the community.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show again. It's been enlightening and informative.
Great. Thank you for having me, Alan. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.